And welcome, Talent Warriors, to another episode of the Talent War Podcast. I'm your host, George Randle, managing partner and head of HR advisory at the Talent War Group. We're a management consulting and executive search firm, and we'd love for you to come visit us at talentwargroup.com for more information. You know, I'm just lining up guests that are just a true gift, people that I've worked with, known, and have influenced my career over the years. And today I get to talk to the Don Robertson, the CHRO at Northwestern Mutual, who, when it comes to finding, mentoring, coaching, attracting, leading talent, very few people do it like he does. And in my time working with him, I've learned so much, like a decade inside the first 6 months. So I hope you'll join us as we talk with Don about all things talent and how they do it better than anybody else at Northwestern Mutual. Hey, welcome back, Talent Warriors. And, you know, folks, I've had the great fortune of having some amazing guests, but today I have a guy who's really led by example and set the example for me that I had the great fortune to work with at HP. I'm in the gym 5 days a week. I'm on my bike on Saturday, on the soccer field. I'm on email 18 hours a day, and I think he still outpaces me. And I think we're pretty close to the same age, although I stopped counting at 50. I advised him to do the same. I don't know if he listened to me. When you get to work for great leaders, it's a real gift in your career, and I certainly got to do that. And so I'm not going to give you the background on this amazing leader, that he's a CHRO. It's just leaders are leaders are leaders, and they don't need an adjective, and they don't need a title, and that's the best intro I could give to somebody who's been a friend, a coach, mentor, and a hell of a boss. So Don Robertson, welcome to the Talent War Podcast.
Thanks, George. It's great to be here. I haven't stopped counting yet. I've actually hit 60, believe it or not, in June. So, but still doing the heavy insanity workouts. And but not, I don't think I'm on email 18 hours a day anymore, George. That's the one advantage of not being with a crazy tech company.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I don't ever remember sending you an email or a text that wasn't instantaneously received. And I was anywhere on the globe at the time. So
that's still true. That's still true.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to be anywhere near you if you're answering texts in the middle of the night with Ann. She looks like she's great adult supervision for you. I'll put it that way.
She makes me leave the phone in another room when we're sleeping.
Oh, smart. And you guys been together, what, 30?
We started dating in 1986. So 35 years,
wow.
Married 30, we'll be 32 in May.
Man, that is crazy. That's crazy. And look, it's the ultimate compliment. I think it's the one thing that we have done well. We've married up, you know, which was not expected of us. You know, if I look back to, I tell people I'm getting better every year. And they think that's an ego-based statement. But I'm like, if you saw where I came from, you would know how true of a statement that is. So I don't know if I got married out of love or sympathy, but it worked out in my favor. I know that much. So, you know, Don, when you and I came into contact with one another at HP, you were already a seasoned executive, but, you know, like very few others, you're one of the very, very few people that had a business acumen that I hadn't seen in CHROs. So if you want, give us a thumbnail. How did you, I don't think you started in HR, did you? You ended up progressing that way, didn't you?
Yeah, correct, George. Most of my first half of my career was not in HR. I started as actually a accounting, got an accounting and finance degree, got my CPA with Deloitte way back, started with them in the 80s. Then I spent a number of years in kind of what I would call the finance organizations, GE Capital being the name that most people would recognize. And then Stanford Research Institute, which was, of course, one of the great kind of research institutes on tech. I like to say that Al Gore actually did not discover the internet, but SRI actually did.
And you heard it here, folks. You've heard it here. Yeah. Definitive proof.
Yeah, I could show you hypertext and Windows and other things from the 1950s. But then I moved in, did some sales. Obviously, HP, I was in sales before I went into HR. And it's a long story how I got into HR. But I think the gist of it was This was right around the time when I think the HR function was starting to realize as a function that they needed to have people that understood the business as well as just understanding the domain of HR. And fortunately, I got a chance to work with probably what I consider one of the greatest HR people I've ever known, Marcela Perez de Alonso. And she recognized that I had a strong affinity for HR, but also had the business and kind of what I would call agility that she needed to help her kind of transform the HR function at HP.
Were you like me at that moment where they're talking to you about HR and you're thinking, wait a minute, really? Did I do something wrong? Why do you want me in HR? That was kind of my first thought. But like I've said a bunch of times on this podcast and with the clients that I work with, that was a gift that I didn't see coming when my career turned to HR. And I mean, it brought me crossing paths with you, Tracy Keogh. I didn't get to work with some of those leaders that you mentioned. They preceded me. But it was one of the greatest turns. So did they have to twist your arm, or were you like, hey, this is the next new challenge, the next new frontier where I can impact? What was it for you?
Well, I mean, when I was in finance roles, I actually had a few times had HR reporting into me. So it wasn't my first exposure into HR. But when they first approached me on it, it was predominantly because HP at the time was having some challenges in how they were doing sales and sales development and sales learning and development, and Cisco was kind of cleaning their clock. And so they really wanted someone to kind of help the HR function, help the sales organization from a development standpoint. And they wanted somebody with that kind of experience. So when I first went in, it was more of kind of they're loaning me into the function for a period of time to help grow and develop the sales organization. And then what happens is I got in it and I realized, my business background, my experience and what I had done was really advantageous to be able to support as an HR leader for a function that you come from, gives you an innate ability to understand the function in a way that, frankly, if you had never been in it, you wouldn't understand. If you have never carried a bag as a sales leader and had a quota and held those kind of things, you're not going to talk to those salespeople the way that I could, because I understood the language, I understood the challenges, I understood what they were going through. And so it gave me more credibility with them in terms of the ability to build that trusting relationship so I could have more of an impact as an HR leader. And that's what I found actually in my career, is that because I tend to think and talk more like a business person who happens to know HR rather than an HR person who's trying to understand the business, it gives me an ability to accelerate a lot of times to a stage of making an impact versus, spending a lot of time just trying to convince people that I actually can help them.
Yeah, I had that when I made that transition to HR. I'd come out of being a consultant in the defense space at KPMG Consulting. And so it was fortunate that I was turned around to be a resource manager, HR leader for the very same segment that I came from. And they were like, really? You know what we do? And I said, yeah, I used to do what you did. I said, so let's figure out how to do this better together. It's interesting that you say that you're a business person doing HR, because I don't remember whether it was Tracy Keogh or it was Meg Whitman. One of the two of them was incessant. You were always like this. I knew you were like this with me. You have to be a student of the business. If you didn't come from the business, you better be a student of. But it's nice that, and Tracy was that way. She came from the business, and then went into HR. And you talked about, and by the way, one of the things I didn't add is, the title of the podcast, the Talent War podcast, that comes from the book, The Talent War, How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. And Don was a huge contributor to that. And we had pages and pages. Matter of fact, we actually spent time figuring out, okay, what's Don not going to be mad about that we leave out, because there was such good material in there. But, let's turn it to that. When you now are that business person who knows HR and you're working with the business, especially coming from sales, talent is everything. Talent is everything. And you must have had an entirely different eye on that talent as compared to your normal recruiting, talent acquisition, HR business partner. I mean, when you walked in, do you think that your organizations looked at talent the same way you did? And did you have to start to change mindsets about how they look at great people?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, George. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that I think businesses that I've been associated with always have been challenged with is, businesses have very ambitious agendas. They have very ambitious strategies. They have large appetites for things they want to do. But oftentimes, then they think about the talent that's going to take to deliver that. And one of the things that I've spent my time in most of the companies I've worked with is trying to help the business understand that you need to be thinking about the talent that it's going to take as you're thinking about what it is you're trying to do. Ideally, what you will do over time is, of course, you'll build your organization to be a talent engine. And so there it becomes second nature. But there's foundational elements that you have to put in place around talent succession planning, rising star analysis, talent management, career growth, career development. And those are the types of things that I've done in my career. Of course, putting in a system like Workday that allows you to even know who your talent is. But one of the most difficult things is to help businesses understand is that the faster you can recognize and what you need from a talent standpoint and put your talent on that, the faster you can accelerate your priorities. And of course, the more window you have that you allow yourself to have, to what you're going to need from a talent, the faster you can actually start to deliver on your business strategies. I mean, ultimately what we have to do as businesses, George, is to get away from requisitions and instead to creating talent pools, and talent pools that are things that, that you're trying to accomplish. So for example, our company here now, I mean, we've got significant investments we're making in technology, particularly significant investments we're making in business initiatives to drive a better client experience and a better advisor experience. And as a result of that, we need to do a lot of technological build and a lot of other things client-wise. And it requires a level of expertise technologically. It requires subject matter experts. It requires a number of different things. The more that we can anticipate when we're going to need those skills and how many, the faster we can start to build programs to put in place. So you can always hire externally, but you also can build internal marketplaces. You can start to build internal processes so you can develop. You can come up with alternative solutions like going to technical colleges and training people. So there's a lot of different levers you can pull. And the more time you give yourself to have those levers be enabled, the more options you have available besides just hiring. That's where labor planning, workforce planning really comes into play, because there's the business strategy, what the business is trying to accomplish. There's investments the business wants to make. There's finance of what you can afford. And then there's the talent that you're going to need to deliver that. And then, of course, there's the talent strategies in between those two of how you're going to address it.
Yeah, I'd come up with a quote, and, my co-author, Mike, has me saying it at every speech we make, that you ought to be treating your human capital with the same rigor, focus, and discipline that you do your financial capital. And I know that you and I have sat through enough QBRs that we probably have DNR on the back of our badge, in case you're suffering death by PowerPoint. If I die, just let me go. The companies that I come into, when I was working with you, talent was always on my brain. How are we doing it? What are the strategies? What are the workforce planning? And I remember working with Manish, and he would be dreaming up these 3-year plans and footprints in different countries. And I'm trying to get ahead of that game. But there's a lot of companies that don't do that. The talent is an afterthought. If you were talking to those companies where, HR, let me digress a little bit. One of the statistics we came up is that CHROs are paid a third less than their C-suite counterparts. And they've been, and many times, resigned to compliance or overhead. And the one of the big things of the book is you don't realize how valuable that HR can be and how critical it is. But what would you say to companies that don't put talent first? How do you start getting there? What would you recommend to, the small to medium business that's, wanting to be a Northwestern Mutual, that's wanting to be the A player on the block and leading the industry?
Well, I mean, George, I think this goes without saying, whoever has the best talent is generally going to win. We are in a talent war. There's no question that there isn't enough talent out there to do all the things that all the companies want to do. And so what I would tell any company that is not emphasizing that enough is, one of the most powerful things you can do is become a talent magnet. And it becomes momentum driven. So if you become a company that's known to develop and grow talent and to, create opportunities for talent to develop and grow, you're going to attract more of them. And there's a number of issues out there that companies are facing. It's not just acquiring the right talent. It's also now you have to, the talent needs to be diverse. It needs to have the right skill sets. There's a number of factors that come into play. It's got to be in the right, location. And of course, now that companies are allowing much more flexibility in remote capabilities, you're going to have a challenge that anyone anywhere in the world can recruit your talent. So you can't just be thinking about it from an acquisition standpoint. You also have to be thinking about it from a development, from a growth, from a retention standpoint. And so therefore, things like enabling your employees to have a career, enabling your employees to achieve their lifetime dreams. So it isn't just a case where the company gets what it needs from the employee. The employee has to get what they need from the company in their own development as well. So there's really two sides of this coin. Oftentimes, companies are simply thinking about the talent they need to deliver for them. But if they don't create an environment that allows the employee to benefit from that experience and grow and develop, you're not going to be, develop and grow your talent. You're not going to keep them. And if you're in the business of constantly having to acquire talent because you're losing them or you're not attracting them, you're going to eventually fall behind, whether it's in how quickly you do things, the quality of what you do, the ideas you come up with. It's no coincidence that the best talent generally work for the best companies and for the best leaders.
Yeah, you were really good on that. And when we talk about leaders, I think one of the things, and I know I've thanked you before, but I think one of the things that I've shared with companies or as an example that you give and many others have given, which is investing in your time and growing current leaders. And, for me, I remember the quote in the book, and I believe it was you that was A players want to work for A players. A players do not want to work for B players. So outside of the talent acquisition space and creating talent pools, what do you say to the up and coming managers or the newly minted managers, the newly minted supervisors, people that are now in charge of developing others? What do you say to them where you are now? I know what you used to say to me, and I always loved it. I was always, picking up something good. But I know that you've carried that on because you've carried so many people up the climbing wall of the career ladder with you. What is your best advice to the leaders and managers that are coming up to retain those people and develop those people?
Well, one of the reasons, George, that I actually have the attitude about this I have is because I was fortunate enough to work with one of the great talent multipliers of all time in business in Jack Welch at GE. And I remember that one of the things that really imprinted on me early in my career was they used to evaluate senior leaders not just by the business performance, but also by how many people that are now in leadership positions across the organization that used to work for that person. And they used to track that. And they used to give a lot of credit for that. And I used to ask myself, why do you think that is? And ultimately, what I think, leaders need to hold themselves accountable to is develop the future leaders of that company that company's going to need. And, oftentimes managers are frankly, they've got their team, they have their top talent, and they don't want to let them go because they can't think of how am I going to succeed without that top talent, And what you have to become is more of a thought about your job is not to just deliver on what you're doing today, but to develop people for the future and elevating in the organization. And so what I tell managers all the time is your job is to be a talent multiplier. Your job is to get, I tell employees, your job is to own your career. You need to be clear as an employee what it is you want to accomplish in your career, the path you want to go down, the skills and capabilities that you're going to need to achieve that. But your manager needs to work with you to chart out a path. So like we're in the wealth management business, and our whole mantra at Northwestern Mutual is about helping our clients develop a financial plan, and then we help them execute against that. Well, I would say the same thing to the employee. Your job is to work with your manager to develop a career plan, and your manager's job is to help you achieve that. So managers are the guides to their employees to achieve their career growth. And if they do that, it means the person's performing, the company's benefiting, but the individual is also benefiting. And therefore, you become an environment that's known as developing talent. And any company that has the reputation and has the ability to be a talent engine is going to do a great job of recruiting and developing talent. And so that's what I tell leaders. I try to tell it in a holistic way. It's not just to benefit you today. It's a benefit, your job is to develop the next generation of not just leaders, but of talent.
Believe it or not, I have lost every bit of sanity, and Mike Sorelli talked me into a book too, which we'll probably be talking to you about here soon. We're already down the path. But one of the key things in this book, we closed out the last book, which was you can't hire or fire your way to success. To your point about creating what we call a legacy of leadership. And I know that that's something that you've done really, really well. But because I'm at a watch time and we are doing just an impactful segment, and I know I've got a couple of questions to get to. I remember you and I had the good fortune to work together. I had the good fortune to work with you, for you twice. And I remember you were telling me about the people that I was going to interview with. And I was like, yeah, I don't have to worry. I interviewed with you. How hard could they be? And I remember we were interviewing you for the book, and you had some really tough questions. I mean, if you knew yourself as a leader, I didn't think they were super tough, but they weren't things that people necessarily prepping for an interview would know. And so when you're looking for talent, tell us what you're digging into if you have to interview a person.
Well, I don't think it's that unique, but, I try to get to know the person at a really authentic level. I mean, we all know that when people go to do interviews, it's almost like a first date. You're trying to put, you wear your best clothes, you have your best, personality on, your right smile, you've done all the things to get ready to make a first impression. What I try to do is get to the third or fourth or fifth date to when the person lets their hair down, what are they about? And so I typically try to ask experiences that will cause that to, go down, because I'm ultimately trying to look for 3 or 4 things, as I told you guys when I met with you. Obviously looking for intellect. So I'm looking for the reason why I ask a lot of different questions, a lot of different ways. I'm trying to understand your intellect. And a lot of the ways I test your intellect is the way you answer questions, the vocabulary you use, the way you think, because I can't make you smart. Listen, I can teach you a lot of things, but I can't teach you intelligence. Either you kind of have it or you don't. I'm looking for somebody who has really good energy, because what we do is not easy, and you need to have the energy, the resilience, the perseverance. So I'm looking for somebody that's got good energy, that they can, overcome the obstacles that are going to come at them. I'm looking for someone who has a good attitude, because nobody wants to work with people that are negative, especially this day and age. Yeah. And then George, there's some underlying things I'm looking for. One is I'm looking for what difficulty or adversity have you dealt with in your life? Because I just believe if people have dealt with those things, they're going to be much better equipped to be able to describe how they did it. And it's going to be much more applicable to what's going to be difficult in work. Because as you know, there's nothing that you're going to be trying to take on from a challenge at a business level that is going to go from A to Z in a straight line.
Never.
And you have to have the resilience. And so those are the kind of things I look at. I also look for somebody who's got agility, to me, and flexibility, because there is oftentimes you're going to need to pivot. And then probably one of the most powerful things I look for is someone who can demonstrate what I call contextual intelligence. In other words, it's the ability to rapidly use the skills and experiences you've established in your life to new sets of issues, but that you draw upon to kind of problem solve your way through those things. An example of that, how sometimes how it can be difficult. You know how to drive a car. You know how to drive a car in the car that you're driving. And you know how to get to work every day, and you know the route you take. But if I took you and dropped you in the middle of the Amazon with a car on the other side of the road and told you, go to X, you still know how to drive a car. You still know how to read a map, but you're not going to be as good at it. But if once you've done it after a week or two in that same location, all of a sudden you start to master it. So the more that we've had experiences in life that allow us to master certain types of skills, the faster you're going to be able to assimilate to whatever new environment you're in. And the more of those experiences that you've had, especially unconventionally, the more that I can get confidence that how you're gonna think and how you're gonna operate. And that's what I try to get to, is get people to not give me those pat answers, but to actually have to think from their experiences how they would operate.
There's nothing worse than candidates, and worse when I've interviewed executives that tap dance, or where they're dancing around it. How much importance do you place on digging into a potential or a candidate who has failed? How do you look at that? How do you dig into that? Because if people were going to tap dance on a question, it's usually the weakness question, the failure, whatever form that comes in. But how do you dig into, finding that resilience, discussing failure with people you consider to work there?
Well, I've tried a lot of different techniques over the years, but the one that I think I've landed on that I think works best is I start the question by describing a failure that I've had. I make it okay to talk about a real failure. Because, we all get these questions. Tell me something that didn't work, or tell me a difficult person. How'd you make it work? And when you ask somebody, tell me a failure you've had, they'll have something, but it won't be profound. People aren't going to generally tell you, I got fired for X. But if you use an example in your life of where you did something that's pretty significant, and by the way, we've all had failures. I have failed, numerous times in my career. And fortunately, I've had opportunities to resurrect. But when you use that as an example of what you've done where you failed on something and it's real and it's profound and it's authentic, I've found that it tends to draw people out.
I like that. I'm going to steal that.
And to be honest with you, when it doesn't, unless they're right out of college, they're lying. Because I don't know anyone that has just gone through life and never had a failure. And by the way, the failure could be as simple as, hey, I did this decision, I did this thing, and I screwed up, I made the wrong call, I misread the situation. I'm not talking about I missed the deadline by a couple of days. I'm talking about, especially in our function, you completely blew a tough conversation, or you got yourself in trouble with somebody and ended up suing the company, and you didn't handle it well. I'm talking about some significant stuff, because most people that I'm going to be interviewing with have had those kinds of things. And by the way, it's okay that you've had those kinds, but it's what did you learn from it, and what are you going to do differently?
Yeah. I've been asked it in so many different ways. And what was interesting is I was coming up probably mid-level manager, I wanted to soften the blow of that failure in my answer. And for some reason, the more senior I got, it finally clicked in my head. And I don't know at what point, I wish I could remember, but it was like, you know what? Listen, they need to see the authentic me. And if they don't like me and they don't value that and they don't see that I've learned my lessons, this isn't the right place, because they're not hiring the real George and what I can deliver and what I've experienced. But I became more authentic as I got older, and I would say, here's what I was thinking. I brought too much ego to the table. I completely over-rotated on that conversation. I was too aggressive on that decision when I didn't need to make it for about another 2 weeks. I should have gathered more data, whatever it was. But I like that. I'm going to start teaching that. I'll give you due credit, make sure that you share your own first. And I had a question come in from a listener, and I'm going to we're going to go a little bit over the map, but somebody asked me, we talk in general terms about developing talent, but do you have any specific tips as to how they would develop that talent? And I know, one of the things is we put such an emphasis that you have to develop your talent, but many times they don't see it from great leaders. Or there are certain things that you just kind of hold dear that are kind of in your muscle memory that if I'm developing somebody, these are the things I'm going to do.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question. And it's something that I think a lot of people leaders could really benefit from understanding. You have to approach the folks that you're privileged to have work for you, that you have to realize that you own a tremendous gift of their career in your hands. And, when I've had people, and there's a reason why people have worked for me now, 3 and 4 or 5 companies, and it's because I think they believe that I look at it that way. And the first thing you need to understand with anyone that's working for you is, what are they trying to accomplish in their career? And where do they want to go? What do they want to be? Not what they want to be when they grow up, because it's not about a specific job, but what do you want to be? A senior leader? Do you want to be in this area? Because then every conversation I have with that person is to help them achieve that. And the key is then to figure out, how do you use the experiences that they will experience working for you and the things that they do every day to deliver for you, but also deliver for them. And so then I know, for example, if I'm talking to somebody on my team and I know they want to eventually have my job, and we've sat down and we've looked at the experiences that they're going to need, the gaps that they have, then every time we have a conversation, I can always I can direct it to, well, this is something that you need to work on if you're going to do that someday. And we need to figure out a way to get you this experience. So I'm going to put you on this project so you can build some of that, or you can get this kind of exposure, because this person's going to be a key decision maker on whether or not you could do that someday. And we want to get you the right exposure. But what I like to call it is career conversations with an intention. And so every time I interact, like every single person that works for me, every time I interact with them, I'm always thinking in the back of my head, hey, she wants that job, so I'm going to give her that feedback. So when she's making this presentation to me, I know it's a good presentation for her level. But if she wants to be my level, she's going to get questions asked this way or that way or that way. And so I'll ask, have you thought about this? And she'll be like, well, no. Well, when you go present to these guys at this level, they're going to ask that. So you need to think about that. And so I just feel it's my responsibility to help prepare them for what they're trying to achieve in their career and to create an environment and experiences that gives them the opportunity to hone those skills. Because you're not going to get to where you want to get to in your career because you're going to get trained. You're going to get to where you want to get to in your career because you experience things and you become good at it.
That's it's a great example. I was thinking of the great Caroline Atherton, if you remember that name.
Yeah, I remember Caroline.
And I was having to do, and I think it was when Nancy was head of enterprise services at the time.
Okay.
And I was preparing a deck and I said, okay, she's like, I want to see this. And I gave it to Caroline. It came back with changes. All right, made those changes, go back to Caroline. It came back 3 or 4 times. She goes, I'm not looking at this again. Get on the phone. I think we were using Blue Jeans at the time. And she said exactly that. She said, this is not crisp. She goes, you were taking 5 slides to say what you could say in 1. She goes, do you think I show 5 slides to Tracy or to Meg or to whomever? I was like, no, Caroline, no. All right, got it. And I remember the word, and it's stuck in my head to this day, crisp. I don't know why, Caroline's in my head to this day on that one particular term. But who do you count as people other than Jack Welch? Anybody come to mind and who invested in you and your career and giving you good advice?
Oh, there's a number of people. The one thing I will tell you is nobody achieves things in life, and certainly I haven't, without the help of a number of folks. I mean, Marcella, as I mentioned earlier, was somebody who believed in me, and Bina Teresia on her team. Bina, of course, was at PepsiCo and was head of HR at Ericsson and is now doing a large private company. She believed in me. She believed in me when I was just coming out of the business into HR. And frankly, I had no business being at the level I was at because I came over at a pretty high level. But she saw she knew I had the raw attributes. In fact, one of the things about the chef versus the baker is Bina was a great example of that. There's nothing on paper that would have said that I should have been the head of HR for HR. I mean, I'd never had an HR job. I had not done HR strategy, but I had all the attributes. I understood organizations. I understood org design. I understood how to, deliver to the business. And so she took me and made me the head of HR for HR, when I had no business doing that. So, I mean, I owe her a tremendous amount. Tracy taught me a lot about, interacting with boards and board level and those levels. And that was a big, that was a big support. Without her support, I don't think I would have been there. And then, of course, business leaders, John Hinshaw, Mike Nefkins, obviously Meg, Mark Hurd. I mean, these were some really, capable people. I remember when you had to go present to Mark Hurd, you better be really, speaking of crisp, the best piece of advice I ever got, George, was, when you go to present to a CEO or a board, put the most important stuff on the first slide because you may not get off of that slide.
Yeah.
We've all been in these presentations where somebody spent, 14 hours preparing the deck, and by God, they were going to take you through the deck even, to get to the punchline. I tell my team all the time, tell me the punchline and then and if I have questions, but, don't take me through the pain. And so that was a big one, I learned that from going to Mark is, he would say, when I went in and present to him, he'd be like, all right, which slide do you really care about? And I'd be like, slide 4. He said, great, let's go to that. And I learned from there on, slide 4 became slide 1. And if I never got off of it, that was fine.
Yeah, I used to teach something. Well, I remember I was a young officer, and for whatever reason, all of my seniors that were supposed to present to the generals, were absent that day when I had to brief a 3-star general. And I had a major pull me aside and he said, be good, be brief, be gone. And that was it. And I was like, okay, I could do that. And I got to slide 2 and I got pummeled, answered the questions, gave my pint of blood, got off the stage right. I survived to fight another day, as they say. So 2 more things before I finally get to the kind of wrap up question. You mentioned diversity, and, I had the previous podcast of this, I had Lisa Schreiber on, who is the Chief Customer Success Officer at Blackline in Myrna Soto. I did the offers on both. I recruited them both. Unbelievable. I think they have more energy than the 2 of us put together, which is really, really frightening. They are some high-paced and really solid leaders, but Myrna brought up this point about diversity that she really wanted to coach leaders on, which was to be deliberate about diversity. And so you're leading and guiding, coaching and mentoring how you develop talent, how you attract, how you source talent. How do you look at diversity for the benefit of all of the people, both that work for you and the millions of clients that you have? I know it's got to play in your, how you approach things, but what's your particular view?
Well, I mean, first of all, you need to institutionalize the way you do your talent so that diversity is at the forefront of anything you do. I mean, one of the, to me, you and I both used to do, services business. And, you remember the days when the old days when the company would sell product and then they would try to bolt on the services as an afterthought. The biggest thing when I think about diversity is it can't be a bolt on. It has to be threaded in what you do. So you have to mainstream the way you think about diversity. So I don't like the idea of having a talent management approach and then you have a D&I approach. I like to think of it as our talent management approach has to have the D&I lens pulled through it. So anytime we're doing slating or anytime we're doing talent management, it's got to have that D&I lens then and there, not afterwards, and you don't like the outcomes and you try to go back and, reconstruct something. So when I look at the percentage of people that are top talent, the percentage of people that are at certain levels, I mean, everything we do is directionally to try to make sure that our workforce is consistent with the diversity goals that we have. And then the mechanisms to create that, how we promote, how we retain, how we acquire, and how we develop is all consistent. And we're very data driven. One of the first things I did when I got here was put in place metrics that we would put in our bonus programs to make sure we achieved our diversity goals. Because I knew that if we were very intentional about what we were trying to do, then we would mechanize all the pieces in place underneath it to make it happen. And I think the company always cared about this. But I think that what we wanted to do was put a lot more mechanisms in place to make sure it happened. But the number one thing I would leave you with is diversity and inclusion cannot be a hobby. It cannot be a separate thing. It has to be threaded in your mainstream of what you do for talent.
Yeah, I was talking to a really big client the other day. I was up in Dallas. And I said, there's so many people that do approach it as a bolt-on. And I said, you need to think of it as strengthening the leadership and cultural fabric of your firm. To your point, if it's not woven in, it's a stray thread. And people will pay attention to that however they do. So I had two last questions. The last one, I'm going to give them both to you in advance because because it's not a gotcha. But the second to last question is your 3 best leadership tips or 3 best lessons. Then the final question before I close out is, if you could go back and tell 22-year-old accounting finance Don Robertson what to do differently that would have accelerated your career, made your career easier, made it better, allowed you to take care of more people, what would that advice be? Because the reason for that question is you've been great at giving back and helping people along. And I have tried to model that from all of the leaders like you and the generals, Tracy, Caroline, Tom, a whole bunch of people that I've worked with over the years. And I feel like this debt that I have to pay to people, because so many people invested in me, I've got to pay it to others twice as much. So that's the context of the question. But before that, 3 great leadership pearls of wisdom.
I don't know about pearls of wisdom, but some of the things that I operate with, George, is obviously some of the things I've talked about already. But first and foremost, make sure that you absolutely spend a lot of time with the people that manage your people. It is, to me, if you don't have your people managers on board with what you're trying to do, if you're in any kind of company where you've got a large organization, you're not going to communicate effectively to the people on the ground. You cannot town hall your way to change management or to change. The people leaders have to be an extension of the leadership teams. And it's incredible to me how often companies don't think about that, how often they don't spend time with their people managers, really helping their people managers understand what they're expected to do, what they need to do, and then spend time with them. Just spend time talking to them. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is spend time with your people at the lower levels. And I would say this for any leader. What was really striking to me is how well a lot of our leaders know the people that they come in contact with regularly, but how great the talent was down in the organization that we didn't know very well. And how when we started to put in place a lot of these mechanisms around talent management and talent development and career pathing, what wonderful talent we had that was down in the organization that we probably didn't know as well as we should have known. And so get to know your talent down in the organization, because there's an incredible amount of talent down there. And the faster you get to know them, the faster you can help them accelerate the career and give them the exposure. And by the way, by doing that, you'll also demonstrate to them how much you care about them, and they'll stay. Because if you start to look at the percentages of people when they leave a company, most of your attrition comes from people that are down in the organization, not at the upper. People don't typically leave an organization upper end unless they get some big offer that blows them away. Where you lose most of the time is your rock stars, 5 to 10 year rock stars who look ahead and they don't see the opportunity, and somebody calls them, and next thing you know, they're like jumping at something when you probably could have had great opportunities for them had you been intentional about it. And then I think the third thing is try to give your employee base as much context as you possibly can. Don't shortcut how transparent you need to be with your employees about why you're doing what you're doing, and as quickly as you can. It's amazing to me, if you allow yourself as a company to be vulnerable and be honest and be open and transparent with your employees, they will be much more willing to work with you and wait for you, et cetera. But, because the one thing I've learned is if you don't give them the information, they'll fill it in with things. And it's oftentimes not what you want them to fill it in with.
Never.
And then you're playing catch up to try to change it around. I mean, I could give you the standard things that the leadership, be honest, be humble, but I thought I'd try to give you things that were a little bit unique maybe to some of the experiences.
No, they've been great. And, I think you have some people listening. I know we do on this end. All of those things that you're crystallizing are all things that you gave to me when I was in my role. And, one of the things that, for those people listening, talent acquisition really wasn't at the table in enterprise services until you came along. And you were one of the first people, matter of fact, the only person I knew that viewed it as an ecosystem. That, and I've used the analogy, for those people that, pro football or soccer, but there's not too many soccer fans, as so Mike Sorelli reminds me all the time. But could you imagine a Bill Belichick or an Andy Reid or Bruce Arians who said, you know what? Special teams isn't important. We're going to focus on the defense and the offense, and whatever happens with special teams, we'll just deal with. Or, we're going to do special teams. It's about the ecosystem. It's about the full team that you put together, and you can't ignore any piece of that. But you've had some just amazing insight. So you got to go back and you got to tell Don, 22 years old, after so many years of great wins, failures that you learned from, all of those things, what are some of the things you wish you would have knocked out of your head much earlier on that you would share with people who look at you, look at me, look at a lot of the people on your team and my team and say, I want to rise to that level at some point. How do I get there faster, better, easier? What would you tell yourself?
Well, there's a number of things we could tell ourselves we want back in time. I mean, obviously, one thing I would tell you is be a lot more humble and willing to listen to other people's points of view. Or, early in my career, it's taken me, at 60 years old now, I've been doing this for 37 years. And last time I checked, I still haven't cornered the market on all the great ideas. And the one thing I would tell myself early in your career is be a lot more willing to get a lot of smart people together to come up with ideas, and don't think you have them all yourself. I mean, one of the things when I came here, I certainly, as you know, because, all the examples you're given is pre-coming here, I was pretty good at what I did. But when I got here, I realized, there's still probably some pretty smart people here, and maybe it might be good to pick their brains for some ideas as well. And so, what we've accomplished here is pretty remarkable. But we did it as a team, and we did it because I have a lot of really smart people around me. And so the one thing I would tell myself at 22 is don't try to do it all by yourself, and leverage a lot of smart people and build those key relationships and build them early. The problem is when you're young, you're just trying to prove yourself. You're trying to do it all yourself. You think you got it all figured out. Many of us have kids that think they know. I love it when my son tells me, you don't understand, Dad. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, I obviously I don't. But there is a lot of things you can learn by getting together people. But the biggest lesson I would tell you is get to know the people that think differently than you and that disagree with you often, because if you could become really good at understanding different perspectives and understanding different people's points of view and approach, it's going to make you more effective later on in life. Well, I mean, even to this day, the biggest challenge you face when you're at my age is leaders who think differently than you, and how do you persuade and how do you convince them? And if you learn early in your career how to influence those kind of people, or at least how to understand them better so you can speak a common language, it's a very powerful thing. And it's a skill I've developed now, but it wasn't one I had most of my career, and it would have benefited me tremendously. So those are probably a few of the nuggets, George, I think, in terms of what I might do differently.
I love that, because when I look back and I came out as a fresh, newly minted officer, I came up against, I went to Berlin, so I had West Pointers there. And so my first thought was to throw my chest out, yell louder. And, it was the military, at the time in 89, more obscenities. And I led with ego. And you're absolutely right. And so that so resonates with me. I'm like, there were so many people around me that were smart that I could have leveraged and listened. So great advice. I just can't thank you enough. And you know what? If I get back in the game, I'm giving you a call. The team you've got there, and I know it's Kelly, right?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Yeah, you're assembling, A players, and no doubt walked into a bunch of A players with the reputation of Northwestern Mutual. Just a great team. So I know your schedule's busy. Can't thank you enough for all that you've done for me, helping us with the book, and then taking time out of your day to day. So I appreciate it. Give my best to the family, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, George. Take care.
See ya.
All righty. Bye-bye.
And thank you for listening to the Talent War podcast, where we discuss all things talent, focusing on a true talent mindset, which is a core belief that the only true competitive advantage you can hope to achieve and maintain is your talent. Join us for the next episode of the Talent War podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, subscribe, please leave a review, and connect with Dr. Tom Lokar and myself on Talent War Group's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram accounts, and send your comments and inquiries to media@Talent War Group. The Talent War podcast is brought to you by the Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm. With services like talent acquisition, leadership development, seminars, and executive coaching, we will work with you to create talent solutions to your business problems. To get started, please visit us at www.talentwargroup.com.